I'm Tony Hall, an attorney in the state of Oregon, and folks around here say I'm damn good at sniffing out marital deceptions. Some call me borderline psychic when it comes to unveiling hidden betrayals, but I swear it's not magic. It's just my gut, and I trust it. I've handled countless divorce cases where one spouse suspects the other of shady business, and I've seen people lie with straight faces, turning their partners into oblivious fools. It's my job to see through all that. Yet, with all my so-called expertise in shattered relationships, I never imagined my own wife might get tangled up in the same nightmare. Life has a twisted sense of humor sometimes. When I first met Jenny Lane, I got that prickly sense that her case would blow up into something bigger than either of us expected. Jenny was a tall brunette in her mid-30s, wearing an emerald green blouse that brought out her hazel eyes. She looked both desperate and determined, if that combination makes any sense at all. Her posture was stiff, like she was holding herself together so she wouldn't collapse right there in my office. I remember she scanned the lobby and timidly asked the receptionist if she'd come to the right place. The receptionist pointed her toward my door, and a minute later, Jenny was sitting across from me, fiddling with her wedding ring. "Mr. Hall," she began quietly, "I'm Jenny Lane. My husband's name is Jimmy Lane. He teaches yoga at Oakwood Fitness Center, and I'm afraid he might be cheating on me." I leaned forward, folding my hands on my desk. "All right," I said in a calm, measured tone, "tell me what makes you suspect he's been unfaithful." She exhaled like she'd been dying to let the words out. "He started bringing these women home for private sessions, as he calls them. At first, he said it was all strictly professional, helping them refine their poses in a more relaxed environment. But I'm not so sure anymore. He always picks specific times, usually late mornings on certain days, when I'm never at the house. Then he says he needs a quiet space, so he locks himself away with them in our living room, supposedly going through yoga routines." I raised an eyebrow. "And how do you know something's up besides that unusual timing?" She shifted. "He used to be all over me. Now, he hardly touches me. Sometimes I smell perfume around the couch, or I see strange belongings like hair ties that aren't mine. And worst of all, he's gotten secretive. If I ask questions, he says I don't respect his profession." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "He says yoga demands loyalty, and that I'm undermining his spiritual energy. I have a particular distaste for nonsense excuses. So, you suspect more than yoga is going on in your house." "That's putting it lightly," she murmured. I told him I might drop by during one of those sessions, and he totally freaked out, saying it would disrupt the calm atmosphere. He insisted I never do that. Every time I call his phone at lunch, it goes straight to voicemail. It's like he's shutting me out completely. I nodded sympathetically. "All right, Jenny, let's talk about what you want me to do." Typically, I gather evidence for a potential divorce proceeding. I build a case by verifying the spouse's whereabouts, documenting any unfaithful activity, and so on. "Is that what you're looking for?" She swallowed. "Yes. I need concrete proof before I make a final decision about divorce. If he's just misguided or caught in some silly midlife crisis, I'd rather fix things. But if he's really cheating, I'm done." She blinked, tears forming in her eyes. "I just want peace of mind." I promised her I'd handle it swiftly. The arrangement was standard. 2 weeks of investigative work, with half the fee paid up front, the other half due upon completion. She handed me a check. Our meeting ended with a formal handshake, and she tried to give me a confident smile, though I saw it waver. Moments later, she was gone, leaving me alone with a brand new can of worms. That was just the beginning. I'd soon find out that brand new can of worms was crawling with venomous snakes. After Jenny left, I had a call to make. My boss, Detective Thomas Reynolds, was the closest thing I had to a partner in these investigations. Even though I'm a private attorney, I also consult with law enforcement from time to time, and Thomas runs a small detective agency that sometimes cross-references leads with me. We had an informal arrangement. If I needed to track someone's movements, tap into a secure feed, or glean more from background checks, I'd talk to Thomas. Our synergy was usually unstoppable. I grabbed my phone and dialed. After a few rings, he answered. Reynolds here. Thomas, it's Tony, I said in a low tone. Listen, I've got a new client who suspects her husband is cheating. The guy's a yoga instructor named Jimmy Lane at Oakwood Fitness. Could you check if there are any known complaints or suspicious behavior on record? Thomas snorted. Yoga teacher, huh? Next, you'll tell me he's chanting mantras while hooking up with half his class. Sure, I'll see if I can turn up anything. Swing by this afternoon and we can chat. By the time I drove to Thomas's office, it was nearing 6 in the evening. Gray clouds hung low, promising rain. Inside, I found him poring over a stack of paperwork. His office was cluttered with old files, coffee cups, and a big corkboard pinned with notes. It smelled faintly of stale pizza, which wasn't surprising since Thomas practically lived there. He handed me a thin folder. Jimmy Lane, age 39, he read from a page summarizing. Grew up in Spokane, Washington. Moved to Oregon about 5 years ago. Got certified in yoga instruction. Started working at Oakwood Fitness 2 years after arrival. No official complaints that we can see. A few remarks from ex-students claiming he was a little too friendly, but no official lawsuits or anything. Still, that might be smoke before the fire. I sighed. Sounds like we'll have to do some additional digging. My client said he's been inviting women to their house for private sessions. She suspects foul play. Honestly, it's classic. The guy's cheating, but denies it by calling it part of his job. Might be the oldest excuse in the book. Thomas cocked his head. You think he's that sloppy? Bringing them to his marital home? He denies wrongdoing, but Jenny says she smells strange perfume and finds suspicious items. That doesn't exactly point to innocence. Thomas leaned back. I'll check if Oakwood Fitness has cameras in any of the studios or hallways. If so, maybe we can snag some archived footage, see how he behaves with these women. I appreciated his thoroughness. Do that. Meanwhile, I'll keep in touch with Jenny. If Lane's messing around, I want to confirm it quickly. We parted ways, and I headed home, not yet aware that my own domestic life was about to explode. My wife, Megan Hall, was a tall, lively redhead with a contagious laugh. She always said she found my line of work fascinating, although I'd never have pegged her as the type to sign up for endless yoga classes. Yet, that was exactly what had happened. Over the previous month or so, she'd started going out in tight yoga pants and returning late, flush-faced. She claimed it was just a new hobby to stay in shape. She never specified which studio she attended, but I never asked either. I trusted her completely, which in hindsight makes me feel like a world-class fool. As soon as I walked through our front door that evening, I noticed Megan wasn't around. She'd left a note on the kitchen counter. Out for yoga, be back by 8. Love you. My gut tightened for a moment. Was it just coincidence? Or was I letting Jenny's case get in my head? I tried to shake it off. Still, I couldn't deny something felt off. Megan had never shown any interest in yoga before, yet now she was obsessed. Shrugging, I made myself a quick sandwich and plopped onto the couch, flipping on the TV, trying to banish uneasy thoughts. After that restless evening, the next few days passed in a blur of calls, background checks, and hush-hush observations of Jimmy Lane's schedule. Jenny had told me which days he insisted she stay out of the house, so I parked my car down the street with tinted windows and waited. Sure enough, on Monday at 11:30, I watched a sleek sports car pull up. Out stepped a woman in trendy workout gear. She knocked, Lane let her in, and the door closed. She emerged about 2 hours later, hair tousled. I couldn't see or hear anything incriminating, but it was suspicious enough. Before I confronted him, I wanted more solid proof. On Wednesday, the same thing happened with a different woman. She arrived at noon and left at 1:30, looking smug and satisfied. My phone buzzed with a text from Jenny, who was at her mother's place for a few days. Any progress? I texted back, gathering more data. We'll update soon. I felt sorry for her, but I also dreaded the storm that would break once we had indisputable evidence. That evening, I got home and found Megan rummaging through the closet for her yoga mat. She flashed me a half-hearted smile. "Hey, you don't mind if I pop out for a quick session, do you?" she asked. My mouth felt dry. "Another one? You've been going nonstop lately," I pointed out, trying to keep my tone neutral. She shrugged, not quite meeting my gaze. "It relaxes me." "You never considered yoga before," I remarked, forcing a casual chuckle. "What's changed?" Her face tensed, like she was suppressing annoyance. "People can pick up new interests, Tony. It's no big deal. I'll be back in a couple hours." She pecked me on the cheek, grabbed her bag, and slipped out. I stood there, feeling an uncomfortable churn in my stomach, the same feeling I got when I knew a client's spouse was lying to them. I told myself to stop being paranoid, to let her have her space. But the next day, Thomas called. "I've got something," he announced. Oakwood Fitness does have cameras, but not in the locker rooms or yoga rooms. However, they do have a few in hallways and entrances. I did a little sweet talking with a friend who works security there, and he let me see some footage. Our pal Jimmy Lane isn't exactly a saint. He's on camera hugging several different women, whispering God knows what in their ears, leading them off to corners. Sometimes they leave together. But wait for the kicker. Your wife's in a few of those videos too. I nearly dropped my phone. "My wife, Megan?" I asked, though I was pretty sure I'd heard correctly. Thomas sighed. "Yeah, man. I didn't believe it at first. I saw the red hair and recognized her. She seemed, well, a little too friendly with him. They left together one morning, came back after a couple of hours. The camera caught them walking in, laughing, arms brushing. I'm sorry, Tony." A wave of dread crashed over me. "Are you sure it was her?" "Absolutely. She had on those pink yoga pants and that turquoise top. I remember her wearing that getup to your office party last month." My skin prickled. My mind raced. Was it possible Megan had become one of Lane's private students? I told Thomas, "I need to see those videos. I need to be absolutely sure." Thomas agreed. We arranged to meet. When I arrived, he showed me the grainy footage. There was Megan, twirling a loose strand of hair as Jimmy Lane smiled at her like they were sharing a private joke. Then they walked off camera, presumably heading toward the side exit. My teeth clenched, so hard my jaw ached. The next day, I got a call from Jenny. She was tired of waiting for me to deliver results. I couldn't bear to tell her that her husband might be fooling around with my wife. That was a detail I wanted confirmed beyond a shadow of a doubt before causing more heartbreak. So I stalled. "Jenny, I'm working on it. I have reason to believe Jimmy's crossing boundaries, but I need more time to get ironclad evidence." She huffed. "Fine. But hurry, please. I can't live like this." I tried to reassure her, but inside I was a wreck. Instead of focusing on Lane, I was hyper-focused on Megan. Every time she left the house, I wondered if she was meeting him. I swore I wouldn't confront her until I had something more damning than a hallway hug. But a few evenings later, I got home earlier than usual and noticed an unfamiliar sedan parked by the curb in front of our place. My heart pounded. If it was Jimmy, I intended to crack his skull. But I walked through the front door, and for a moment, the house seemed quiet. Then I heard low laughter from the living room. As I stepped inside, I saw them on the couch. Megan in a snug tank top, Jimmy Lane in a casual t-shirt, both leaning in close, grinning. They were hugging. I caught that hush of tension around them, like they'd been flirting, about to cross a line. I whipped out my phone, snapping a couple of photos. At first, they didn't notice me. When they finally looked up, Megan gasped. "Tony," she exclaimed, "you're home early." Jimmy didn't move from the couch. He simply stared at me, his eyebrows raised, like he was assessing whether I was a threat. My anger boiled over. "You mind telling me why you're in my house, Lane?" Megan tried to interject, but I ignored her. I snapped another picture because I wanted proof. Jimmy got to his feet, stepping between Megan and me. "Listen, man, I was just showing her some meditation techniques. he said, wearing the most insincere smile imaginable. Right, because meditation always involves snuggling on the couch, I retorted. Get your sleazy yoga routine out of my face, Lane. Megan's cheeks flushed as she stood. It's not what you think, she insisted, voice trembling. We were just... I laughed bitterly. Save it. I'm not an idiot. Lane shot me a condescending smirk. Megan told me you're the type to jump to conclusions. We're planning a calm night at a friend's cabin, that's all. A little retreat. I felt my pulse spike. A calm night? So you're telling me that you plan to spend the night together? In a friend's cabin? I repeated, my tone dripping with sarcasm. I whipped out my phone again, because I'm pretty sure your wife would love to hear about that. Have you forgotten Jenny Jimmy? He stiffened. Don't bring my wife into this. We're free to do what we want, Tony. Yoga is about freedom. You wouldn't understand. That was it. Rage flooded my system. I lunged to the side, snatching the baseball bat I kept near the coat rack for home defense. Lane's eyes went wide, and he backed up, his arms rising protectively. Megan shrieked, "Oh my God, Tony, calm down. Get the hell away from my wife," I growled, brandishing the bat. Lane darted back, stumbling against the couch. I advanced, jabbing the bat in his direction. You come into my home, you flirt with Megan, and you think I'm too stupid to notice your little game? Think again. He put his hands up in a faux peace gesture. All right, man, chill. We haven't done anything yet. I exploded. Yet? You worthless lying piece of... I swung the bat in the air, not connecting with him, but scaring him enough to stumble and topple over the coffee table. Megan screamed again, rushing to help him, but I blocked her path. Don't you dare protect this scumbag, I snarled. She turned to me with anger. Tony, you're losing your mind. Stop acting like a maniac. I advanced on Lane, who was scrambling backward. Consider this your final warning. Get your butt off my property before I send you to the hospital. And if you ever step foot in my house again, I'll do worse than wave this bat. Understand? He nodded frantically, face pale. Megan tried to speak, but Lane pushed past her and made a beeline for the door. I watched him leave, teeth clenched. Then I turned to Megan, who wore a stricken expression. My entire body shook with adrenaline. What the hell is going on with you? I demanded, voice trembling. Signing up for yoga every other day, sneaking around with him? Are you actually hooking up with that jerk? She glared at me. So what if I am? You're never home these days, and you're always digging in other people's relationships. Maybe I just wanted to feel alive. I felt like she'd punched me. That's your excuse? She tossed her hair. It's not an excuse, Tony. It's how I feel. I'm tired of being your second priority behind your career. Lane made me realize I can have fun without constantly playing the loyal wife role. I stepped back, lowering the bat to my side. My heart ached. I can't believe what I'm hearing. Do you even love me anymore? She let out a sharp laugh. Love? Don't get dramatic. You're the one storming in here, swinging a bat, threatening someone who taught me more about self-expression than you ever did. I wanted to scream at her, to argue, but the pain was so overwhelming I couldn't form coherent words. Instead, I gritted my teeth. Pack your things. Go find somewhere else to stay. If you're so keen on Yoga Boy, go to him, but you're not staying under my roof after this. She crossed her arms, looking almost defiant. Fine. I'm leaving. I stood there, still gripping the bat, as she gathered a few essentials and stormed out. The door slammed. My breath came in ragged bursts, and I nearly collapsed onto the couch. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. The entire scene felt surreal. I'd handled dozens of cases like this for other people, always so calm and collected. But my own crisis had ripped me apart. Part of me wanted to chase after her, to beg her to reconsider, but my pride and my fury wouldn't allow it. I spent that night staring blankly at my living room ceiling, occasionally replaying the moment Lane smirked at me, practically announcing that he would do whatever he wanted with my wife. I fantasized about smashing his face with my bat for real. But I wasn't about to land myself in prison over that slimy jerk. Instead, I vowed to ruin him in court in any other way I could. I was well connected among local attorneys and judges, and I intended to use those connections mercilessly. The next morning, I called Detective Reynolds. "Thomas," I said, voice hoarse, "this is personal now. Jimmy Lane is screwing with my life, just like he's messing with Jenny's. I need every bit of dirt on that guy. I want to hit him so hard he regrets every manipulative session of yoga he ever taught." Thomas, sounding shocked, asked, "What happened?" I explained the confrontation and how Megan left with her temper flaring. Thomas cursed under his breath. "I'm sorry, man. If there's anything I can do, let me know." I exhaled. "Check if Oakwood Fitness has more footage of Lane with other women. Also, see if he's got a record of any lawsuits in other states. Hell, we might hack into the gym's camera feeds if that's possible. I need more than hallway footage. I want to see exactly how he seduces these women." Thomas hesitated. "You're not usually the type to cross that line, Tony. This would be illegal." I snorted. "I don't care. He turned my marriage into a joke. I want enough proof to bury him in civil court if needed." My voice cracked. "If you're not comfortable, I'll find someone else to handle it." Thomas paused, then reluctantly said, "All right, I'll see what I can arrange. Let me call a buddy of mine who works in private security. Maybe we can get direct access to the fitness club cameras." "Thank you," I muttered. While waiting to hear back, I tried to keep my head clear. I had to present a strong front, but inside I was fractured. Then, to make matters even more bizarre, Jenny Lane texted me again. She'd come home briefly the night before, only to find Jimmy gone. "He must be with that woman," she wrote. My stomach sank, realizing that that woman was probably my wife. But I didn't confirm or deny it. Instead, I asked Jenny if she wanted to talk about next steps. She agreed, and a couple of hours later, she showed up at my place, looking exhausted. She carried a small suitcase saying, "I don't want to stay under the same roof as Jimmy while this is all happening. My mother's place is tiny, and she's got health issues. Would it be all right if I crashed here a night or two? I'll pay for everything, I swear." I almost refused, but empathy got the better of me. "Fine, Jenny. You can use the guest room. Just be warned, I'm not exactly in the best emotional shape right now." She sniffled, nodding. "I heard some rumors that Jimmy might be involved with another married woman. I assume you know about that. Anyway, I appreciate your help." I let her in, and she seemed relieved to be somewhere safe. Over coffee, we discussed the upcoming confrontation. She told me how Jimmy had been evasive for weeks, claiming his personal yoga brand required total focus, and that she was an obstacle to his spiritual path. "He basically says I'm messing with his mojo, so he needs solitude," Jenny said bitterly. I tried to keep my expression neutral, not wanting to tell her that I suspected the other married woman was Megan. But she must have sensed something in my demeanor. "Tony, if you know something, you can tell me." I hesitated. "Honestly, I'm not sure how to say this. I think your husband has been seeing multiple women, including someone close to me. I discovered something last night, and that's all I can say for now." She blinked, then bit her lip. "Your wife? Is that who you mean?" My silence was answer enough. Jenny gasped, leaning back. "Oh God, Tony, I'm so sorry. I had no idea." We ended up consoling each other in a weird sort of heartbreak kinship. I never expected to bond with a client over such a personal tragedy, but sometimes life deals you a twisted set of cards. That night, I slept fitfully, hearing every little noise, half expecting Megan or Jimmy to show up. Neither did. The next day, Thomas called me and said, "I've got something. My security buddy knows a guy who installed the camera system at Oakwood. We might be able to extract some archived footage from the main server. This is a major gray area, so keep quiet." "Let's do it," I replied. I was in such a vengeful state I barely cared about legality anymore. We met after hours in a back office near Oakwood Fitness. Thomas's buddy tapped into the local network. He typed away at his laptop, muttering about credentials and encryption. Eventually, he found directories labeled Main Hall, Studio A, Studio B, Front Desk, Rear Entrance. We began scanning the archived files from the past month. The footage displayed Lane flirting with various women, hugging them, whispering in corners. Sometimes they'd exit together. Sometimes he'd lead them into side rooms. The pattern was obvious. A charismatic teacher who used his yoga sessions to lure vulnerable students. I felt my blood boil. Then we found the segment where Lane was with Megan. They were standing by a row of yoga mats, leaning close, laughing. He brushed a hand across her lower back, a gesture that looked far too intimate. She didn't resist. We kept digging, discovering more incriminating material. Several times, Lane escorted women to that rear entrance, out of camera range, and reappeared much later. One clip showed him walking out with Megan, both of them wearing smirks, vanishing into the parking lot. Even worse, we found a folder from a hidden camera in a small storeroom. Lane had apparently stashed a camera himself, maybe to record private lessons. I refused to watch everything in detail, but Thomas glimpsed some frames that suggested half-clothed yoga positions. That was all I needed to confirm Lane's scumbag tendencies. Armed with a flash drive of damaging footage, Thomas and I retreated. I told him my next move was to corner Lane legally, ensuring Jenny's divorce settlement would gut him, and also to prepare a lawsuit for alienation of affection, if that angle applied. That was a tricky legal approach in some states, but I was motivated. Meanwhile, Jenny decided to file for separation immediately, using me as her counsel. We hammered out the paperwork, listing infidelity as the primary cause. She also insisted on an equitable share of their home and assets. Lane had built up a decent bank account from his classes, private sessions, and workshops. She wanted half, or more. The plan was to confront Lane with all the evidence so that he'd realize how royally screwed he was. But in a bizarre twist, Lane and Megan showed up together at my doorstep that same night, presumably to discuss everything. Jenny and I exchanged horrified looks when we heard the knock. I opened the door to see them standing on the porch. Megan looked pained, and Lane had that irritating smugness. "What are you two doing here?" I growled, stepping out, shutting the door behind me so Jenny wouldn't have to face him. Lane lifted his palms as if offering peace. "Look, Tony, we just wanted to come clean. Megan's told me she's unhappy in your marriage, and I'm unhappy in mine. We plan to have a steamy night together," he declared, making me want to throttle him. "But we don't intend to rub it in your face. There's no need for lawyers to get so hostile." I nearly laughed in disbelief. No need for lawyers? I am a lawyer, you brain-dead yoga freak, and you have no idea what's coming your way. Or do you? Because I have enough evidence to bury you. Megan winced at my tone, but said nothing. Lane tried to defend himself, spouting nonsense about cosmic energy and free love. I cut him off. "Spare me the speech. Go back to your downward dog nonsense. Come near me or Jenny again, and I'll show you what real hostility looks like." They gave me a condescending glare, then left. I resisted the urge to chase him with my bat again. Instead, I returned inside, seething. Jenny had overheard enough to realize Lane had no remorse. "He's gone off the deep end," she whispered, tears welling. "I can't believe I married that jerk." We finalized the separation papers that night. Over the next few days, I prepared a legal onslaught. I collaborated with Thomas to gather testimonials from ex-students who'd had questionable encounters with Lane. Some were embarrassed, but once they heard how many women he'd misled, they agreed to speak up. My goal was to pressure him into the worst settlement imaginable, ensuring Jenny left the marriage with a hefty portion of his assets. As for Megan, I reached a point where I just wanted her gone from my life. If she'd chosen Lane, good riddance. Jenny and I formed an odd alliance. Though our hearts were broken, we found solace in each other's company, comparing notes on the ridiculous lines Lane had fed us. She told me how he'd once claimed he needed spiritual synergy every Tuesday and Thursday, which turned out to be code for hooking up with some unsuspecting student. His entire act was a sham. Finally, we filed the paperwork in court. I also prepared a lawsuit for intentional infliction of emotional distress on Jenny's behalf, citing Lane's manipulative actions. At first, Lane thought he could bluff. But when we sent the official documents to Oakwood Fitness, letting them know about the hush-hush camera footage, the management panicked. They immediately suspended Lane, pending an internal review. Suddenly, he lost his main source of income. The man who'd boasted about energy flow was about to see his finances flow right down the drain. Megan, as far as I knew, was staying with Lane in some cramped rental he'd found. She tried calling me once, asking about splitting our assets. I told her flatly I was filing for divorce, with her infidelity as the cause. The conversation ended with her screaming that I was heartless and me accusing her of betraying me in the most humiliating way possible. When she demanded spousal support, I laughed so hard I almost choked. I had enough evidence of her cheating to ensure she got next to nothing. Jenny kept me updated on Lane's meltdown. He threatened to countersue her for defamation, claiming the camera evidence was illegally obtained. That might have given us a headache, except we had a network of other women willing to testify about his misdeeds. Lane's only strategy was to lash out, but he was cornered. Midway through the tension, Lane apparently tried to reason with Jenny in person. She told me he showed up at her friend's house, where she was temporarily staying, and begged her to drop the legal action. He promised he'd give her half the money in their joint accounts if she just stopped the lawsuits. She refused. That same evening, Megan called me again, furious that I was assisting Jenny, as though I'd chosen sides. "You're a monster," Megan said, voice thick with anger. "You want to ruin Jimmy, but you're also hurting me?" I snapped. "You ruined us. Don't twist this around. You made your bed, so enjoy your steamy nights with him. Now face the consequences." Megan hung up, cursing me out. I felt a bitter satisfaction that she finally understood I wasn't some doormat. My emotional wounds weren't healed, but I was determined to see this battle through. Over the next week, everything escalated. Oakwood Fitness fired Lane after reviewing the footage. He tried to hold private classes in a park, but word spread that he was at the center of a messy scandal. Students didn't want the drama. Realizing he was in a dire situation, he started calling me late at night. Once, I answered just to hear him out. His voice was shaky. "Tony, you gotta help me. You know the law. Jenny wants everything. She froze the accounts. I'm drowning." I barked a humorless laugh. "Help you? You must be out of your mind. You destroyed my marriage. You humiliated Jenny. You manipulated who knows how many women. And now you want me to bail you out." "Dude," he pleaded, "I never meant for it to go this far. It was just yoga and some freedom. It turned into a big mess. I'm panicking." My response was cold. "You should have thought about that before hooking up with married women. This is your bed, Lane. Lie in it." I hung up. Days later, we found out that Lane was served official divorce papers from Jenny, plus a civil lawsuit that detailed his misconduct. Word on the street was he was scrabbling for legal representation, but no decent attorney would touch him without a hefty retainer. By now, he was nearly broke. Even Megan started distancing herself. Rumor had it she was outraged that Lane's finances had hit rock bottom, and she didn't want to share in the disgrace. That's about when part one of this personal fiasco came to a head. Lane finally realized he stood no chance against the collective mountain of evidence and testimonies. He started texting Jenny, offering to settle quickly if she agreed to certain terms. Meanwhile, I'd already filed for my own divorce from Megan. I intended to keep my house. She could have her clothes, her car, and that was about it. If she complained, I had the photographic and video proof of her canoodling with Lane. That shut down most of her protests. Meanwhile, Detective Reynolds found more hidden footage from the fitness club's storage drive, showing Lane behind closed doors with my wife for extended periods. The timestamps matched the days Megan claimed she was out with friends. Even though I expected it, seeing it spelled out that plainly was like a punch to the gut. I vowed that once my divorce was final, I'd wipe Megan from my mind for good. Jenny, sharing my anger, said she wanted Lane to suffer as much as possible. I didn't blame her, but part of me also wanted to wrap this up and move on. My heart was raw. My professional instincts told me that if we dragged it out forever, we'd just keep reopening the wound. Jenny eventually settled on a strategy to ensure she got a decent settlement and left him with minimal resources. We were all set for mediation, which was bound to be explosive. And so part one of this insane saga ended with Lane on the brink of complete ruin, Megan fuming and penniless, and me standing on the precipice of a brand new life I never asked for. Jenny was living under my roof for the time being, forming a fragile bond out of mutual betrayal. The lawsuits loomed, threatening more ugly confrontations. Nobody got out unscathed, but maybe that's the price of playing these high-stakes marital games. Sometimes you don't realize your own vulnerability until a smooth-talking yoga instructor tears your world apart. Only then do you see how quickly trust can shatter, leaving you with fury, heartbreak, and an arsenal of evidence that might destroy everyone who crossed your path. For the first few days after we sent the paperwork to Lane, everything felt like a slow march toward doom. I was cooped up in my own house with Jenny, both of us on edge, both trying to hold ourselves together. Even though I'd normally advise clients to remain calm, I found myself pacing hallways, clenching and unclenching my fists, unable to sleep for more than a couple hours at a time. Each morning, Jenny would cook breakfast in a tense silence, and I'd feel the crushing reality that my marriage was basically over. By the time the bacon cooled, my appetite was gone. Meanwhile, Megan's texts became short, furious rants that mostly fell into two categories: her demanding that I stop the legal crusade, or her cursing me for daring to proceed with a divorce that might deprive her of a cushy alimony. I'd already told her I wanted nothing from her except a signature that acknowledged our irreparable split. When she realized I had the power to prove her wrongdoing, she switched to half-hearted apologies and emotional manipulation. She insisted that I'd driven her away with my obsession for exposing cheating spouses, ironically blaming my career for her affair. I didn't buy it, and I told her so in no uncertain terms. Thomas Reynolds stayed in constant contact, sharing updates from Oakwood Fitness. Apparently, Lane was trying to claim that the hidden footage had been placed without his consent, labeling it entrapment. But the management refused to play along. They'd launched an internal investigation, discovered plenty of cause to terminate him, and were ready to testify that Lane had misled them for ages. A couple of employees even claimed Lane occasionally disappeared into equipment rooms with women, only to emerge disheveled. In short, the deeper we dug, the uglier the revelations got. Late one night, maybe around 2, Jenny and I were in the living room. She was on the couch with puffy eyes, staring at some old sitcom that neither of us followed. Without turning off the TV, she finally spoke. "Tony, I'm sorry you got dragged into this," she whispered. I shook my head. "No, I dragged myself in. I was investigating your husband for you, never suspecting he might take a special interest in Megan." She rubbed the back of her neck. "Jimmy's not the man I thought he was. I wish I'd never married him. I wasted so many years believing he was passionate about yoga because it helped people. But he's just a manipulator who likes to use physical closeness as an excuse to cross boundaries. I'm humiliated." Her eyes brimmed with tears. On impulse, I rested my hand lightly on her shoulder. It wasn't romantic, more like one shattered soul comforting another. She surprised me by turning, burying her face against my chest and sobbing. With a shaky breath, I wrapped my arms around her. For a moment, I felt something stirring, an odd sense of companionship that went beyond our lawyer-client relationship. But I pushed that thought away. We were both too raw, too hurt to think straight. Still, holding her felt more genuine than anything I'd shared with Megan in recent memory. We ended up falling asleep like that, me slumped to one end of the couch, Jenny curled up next to me, the TV flickering aimlessly in the background. The following morning, I woke with a stiff neck and a renewed resolve. I had a divorce to finalize, and Jenny needed her legal victory against Lane. At around 9, I got a call from an unknown number. I picked up warily, half expecting more threats from Megan or Lane. But it was a man's voice I didn't recognize. "Hello, Mr. Hall," he said calmly. "My name is Albert Ford. I'm an attorney representing Jimmy Lane." Immediately, I felt my chest tighten. "How'd you get my number?" I demanded. He gave a tiny sniff. "Your wife provided it, apparently hoping we could mediate a settlement that would satisfy both Lane and Megan. Before you hang up, please know I'd prefer an amicable resolution. My client is willing to negotiate terms, particularly regarding the divorce from Jenny, as well as your own concerns with Megan." I nearly laughed. We're long past amicable. Lane destroyed my life and trashed Jenny's. Also, Megan is delusional if she thinks she'll talk me into letting them off the hook. He paused. "All right, I respect your anger. But sometimes a compromise can benefit everyone. Lane is prepared to offer Jenny a lump sum settlement if she'll drop the emotional distress lawsuit and finalize the divorce quietly. And regarding your personal matter with Megan, there's a possibility for an uncontested divorce if we all sign non-disclosure agreements. You can walk away with minimal fuss." I considered the idea of no fuss. Part of me wanted to drag Lane's name through every scandalous headline. But another part was exhausted, yearning for a quicker path to freedom. "Let me speak with Jenny," I muttered. "We'll get back to you if we decide anything." I hung up, half enraged at the audacity, half tempted by closure. Jenny was making coffee in the kitchen. When I told her about the call, she smacked her mug on the countertop. "He wants me to drop the lawsuit just so they can avoid the public mess?" She shook her head, eyes flashing. "Does he think throwing money at me will erase what he did? He brought countless women into our house, lied to me, and ruined your marriage." I sighed. "I know, but we're both emotionally drained. A settlement might ensure you get a good chunk of his assets quickly, no long trial. You can move on faster." She crossed her arms. "If I settle, I want absolute control of the house, the car, and at least 70% of the bank accounts. And I refuse to sign any gag order that stops me from telling people the truth about him." I admired her spirit, though part of me worried we'd never get Lane to agree to that. "Fine," I said. "I'll pass that message along. But don't be surprised if he balks." Jenny shrugged defiantly, as though daring him to try. That afternoon, I texted Albert Ford. He replied that Lane was willing to consider a large payout, but he insisted on some privacy clause. We volleyed back and forth until the early evening, and eventually, we ended in a stalemate. Lane wouldn't budge unless Jenny agreed never to speak publicly about his antics. Jenny refused to be muzzled. By the time we gave up, the tension felt heavier than ever. In the midst of that standoff, Megan decided to barge onto my property without warning. I just stepped outside to grab the mail when I saw her minivan screech to a halt at the curb. She hopped out wearing leggings and a loose sweater that hung crooked on her shoulders. If she was aiming for a dramatic entrance, she nailed it. "We need to talk," she said in a raw voice, glancing warily at my front door, as though she expected Jenny to appear. I folded my arms. This better be quick. Megan's jaw clenched. "You're humiliating me by dragging me into this fiasco. Everyone thinks I'm a homewrecker. My friends won't even return my calls." Something inside me snapped. "Are you expecting sympathy? You were hugging that scumbag in my house, maybe planning a steamy night in a cabin. Don't pretend you're innocent." She pressed her lips into a thin line. "All right, fine. I messed up, but you always put your job first. You never had time for me." Jimmy promised excitement and attention. I got carried away. I almost felt sorry for her, but then I remembered every bit of heartbreak she caused. You chose your path, I said coldly. Now live with it. I'm not giving you spousal support, and I'm not letting you paint me as a neglectful husband. She let out a frustrated sigh. That's why I came. I want to settle this, without dragging each other through the mud. You can keep the house. I'll take my car, a little cash, and that's it. We don't have kids. So let's just sign the papers and be done. I studied her face, trying to figure out if there was a catch. That's all you want? Her gaze drifted. Yes. Lane is pressuring me to come up with money. He's panicking about his own divorce. If I leave with minimal fuss, maybe he'll calm down. She twisted a strand of hair nervously. I don't know. We're not exactly in a good place, but I feel obligated to help him. A bitter laugh escaped me. You feel obligated to save the clown who wrecked my marriage? Good luck with that. You can do whatever you want, Megan. Just don't come crying to me when it crashes down on you. She looked angry, then defeated. Fine. I'll have my lawyer reach out to finalize. I'm done. She whirled around and marched back to her van. I stood there, seething, until she disappeared around the corner. At least I knew my own divorce would move forward swiftly now. That was one loose end tied. Later that night, after Jenny and I polished off a cheap takeout meal, Thomas called to say he had big news. Lane was facing a criminal complaint. One of his former students had accused him of misrepresenting himself as a licensed therapist. Though yoga instruction wasn't regulated the same way, this woman claimed Lane gave her medication and tried to diagnose her emotional struggles, crossing some serious legal boundaries. With that added to the fire, Lane's situation looked grim. 2 mornings later, everything exploded. Thomas texted me that Lane had been arrested outside a coffee shop, reportedly for breaking the terms of a restraining order his former student had filed. The news spread fast, and soon I had local reporters calling, asking if I would comment since I was known to handle cheating spouse cases. I politely declined. I wasn't looking to become the face of a sensational scandal, and Jenny wanted to maintain some privacy too. Within a day, Lane posted bail, but his arrogance had taken a hit. Now that he was on the police's radar, he had to tread carefully. He also knew that Oakwood Fitness was fully cooperating with investigations. Hoping to salvage something, he fired Albert Ford and started calling me directly, leaving frantic voicemails. I erased most of them, not wanting to hear his pathetic pleas. Jenny, meanwhile, gathered more evidence from old text messages, receipts from questionable yoga sessions, and testimonies from jilted students. The final nail was inevitable. A week later, Lane tried a last-ditch intimidation stunt, showing up at my front door around midnight. Jenny and I were halfway asleep when we heard banging. I rushed to open it and found Lane on my porch, hair disheveled, eyes crazed, babbling about how he'd lost his job, his money, and nearly everything else. Jenny came up behind me, arms folded. "Jimmy, you need to leave," she said, voice unyielding. He pointed a trembling finger at her. "You ruined me," he hissed. "You and this so-called super lawyer. You cost me my reputation." Then he saw me and sneered. "Enjoy your phony victory, Tony. I hope you sleep well knowing you destroyed a man's life." Fury rushed through me. "You destroyed your own life, Lane. My only regret is that I didn't see it sooner. Now get off my property, or I'll call the police." He looked ready to lash out, but then the door across the street opened, and my neighbor stepped out, phone in hand. Lane blinked, realizing he had no backup. He lurched away, stumbling to his car, muttering curses. I let out a shaky breath, adrenaline racing through my veins. Jenny shut the door, locking it. "I can't believe I ever loved that man," she whispered, shoulders tense. "He's a complete stranger to me now." I put a hand on her arm. "He's unhinged. I'll make sure a restraining order is in place by tomorrow." The next day, a locksmith came to install heavier deadbolts. Thomas arranged for a plainclothes officer to drive by every so often, just in case Lane got ideas. We scheduled the final divorce hearing for Jenny, where she'd present overwhelming evidence of his adultery and misconduct. My own divorce with Megan was nearing the final stage too, ironically simpler because we had no children and she finally agreed to minimal demands. On the morning of Jenny's hearing, we dressed in formal clothes. She wore a navy blue blouse and carried a folder containing screenshots, receipts, and statements. I wore my best suit, ready to handle any surprises Lane might attempt. He arrived in wrinkled clothes, sporting a bruised cheek. Word on the street was he'd been jumped outside a bar by an unknown assailant. I had my guesses, maybe the husband of another woman he'd scammed. Lane avoided eye contact with Jenny, focusing on the legal process. When the judge called the case, Jenny testified calmly that Lane had violated her trust, that he had lured many women under the guise of yoga, and that she sought a divorce on grounds of fault. Lane mumbled a few disjointed responses, but the evidence was damning. The judge declared the marriage irretrievably broken and awarded Jenny the house, the car, and a sizable chunk of their remaining joint accounts. The ruling was swift and decisive. Outside the courtroom, Lane shot me a venomous glare, like he wanted to spit nails at me. I just smiled grimly. Jenny stood tall, arms folded. "It's done," she said, exhaling shakily. "I'm finally free of him." When Lane stalked off, I noticed a faint limp. Another rumor suggested he'd been in a scuffle days earlier, maybe from someone else who felt burned. Either way, I had zero sympathy left for the man. I was glad to see him unravel. He glowered over his shoulder once, then disappeared down the hall. A couple of days later, Megan and I had our final divorce hearing. She showed up with a different attorney, a meek fellow who was clearly relieved Megan had settled almost everything out of court. The judge asked a few questions, then signed off. Just like that, my marriage was officially over. Megan refused to meet my eyes. She grabbed her purse and left without a word. We had no reason ever to speak again, and I felt a strange mixture of sorrow and liberation. That night, Jenny and I shared a bottle of wine to celebrate her newfound independence and my own. We laughed darkly about the parallel nightmares we'd escaped, though a shadow of pain lingered in the background. By the time the bottle was empty, we realized how comfortable we felt with each other, as if we'd been friends for ages. The next morning, she decided to move back to her house, so I helped her gather her suitcase. As she was leaving, she paused by the doorway, biting her lip. "Tony, I can't thank you enough. I don't want to impose any longer, but I think we should keep in touch, maybe see if we can start over. Both of us." Her words hung in the air. Part of me hesitated, worried we were both rebounding. Yet I couldn't deny a powerful attraction. "Let's take it slow," I said, smiling. "I'm open to exploring whatever this is, but I don't want us rushing into something just because we shared heartbreak." She nodded, eyes shining. "Deal." We ended with a long, tight hug that hinted at deeper feelings on both sides. I watched her drive away, my mind swirling. Over the next few weeks, I heard that Lane's criminal charges were piling up. At least 2 other women reported questionable behavior, including unauthorized medical advice. The police also investigated allegations of him defrauding some people by selling bogus yoga nutritional supplements. The sum of it all meant Lane was likely facing prison time if convicted. I figured that was the end of it. But then, shockingly, we got word he'd been attacked again, badly enough to require a hospital stay. Nobody knew who delivered the beating. Maybe a victim's furious spouse, maybe some random street altercation. Whispers circulated that Lane was barely able to walk after they finished with him. Jenny told me she felt a strange pity. "I hate what he did," she said softly, "but I never wished him physical harm." I nodded, torn between my own anger and a reluctant sense of compassion. Still, I couldn't muster much sympathy for the man who'd nearly wrecked both our worlds. A month later, Lane stood trial for various counts of fraud and practicing without a license. The evidence was clear. He was found guilty on multiple counts, though sentencing was delayed. On the night before the sentencing hearing, he was discovered unresponsive in his jail cell. Rumor had it he used a bed sheet to hang himself rather than face the consequences. The official statement confirmed he died from asphyxiation. Jenny, and I heard about it the next morning. She turned pale, tears forming, and we sat quietly, absorbing the gravity of the news. Over the next days, we reflected on how quickly everything had spiraled, how Lane's life had gone from a thriving business to utter catastrophe. Though I despised him for what he'd done, I couldn't help feeling a grim heaviness at his demise. Part of me thought, good riddance. Another part felt disturbed that the man ended it all rather than atone for his actions in a cell. As for Megan, she vanished from my radar. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that she'd left town. Maybe she sought a fresh start. I never bothered to confirm. My own future stretched ahead, wide open. Not long after Lane's death, Jenny and I started seeing each other more frequently. We took walks in the park, visited local diners for late-night pie, and found ourselves bonding over small joys. She was timid at first, still grieving the collapse of her marriage, and I harbored resentment over my own. But there was a tenderness between us, a trust forged by our shared ordeal. Within 6 months, we'd gotten serious enough to move in together. By the following year, I proposed. We had a small ceremony at a lakeside retreat, inviting only close friends. Thomas was my best man, and Jenny's sister was her maid of honor. No drama, no big speeches, just a quiet vow to share life's burdens and joys. We eventually had 2 children, twin boys. Yes, we joked about that cosmic twist, 2 new lives born from 2 broken marriages. I cut back on the more stressful divorce cases, focusing on property disputes and other civil matters, eager to avoid the toxic heartbreak I'd once specialized in exposing. Jenny sold the house she'd taken from Lane, using some of that money to invest in a local bookstore, fulfilling a dream she'd had since before her ill-fated marriage. Life felt peaceful, almost impossibly so, after the whirlwind of betrayal and vengeance we'd survived. Sometimes, in the middle of a lazy Saturday afternoon, I'd catch Jenny looking at me with a gentle, knowing smile, as if we both remembered the nights of tears and fury that ended up leading us here. We never forgot the pain Lane caused, or how Megan had chosen to sabotage our marriage for that fling. But we found something sweet in building a new life on the ashes of the old. Everyone else drifted away. Megan in search of who knows what, Lane lost to his own dark decision, and the other yoga clients scattered into the wind. Only Thomas remained a constant friend, often dropping by to tease me for becoming a soft domestic type. I tease him back for never settling down. We had our closeness shaped by those insane events. And so, that final chapter closed with Lane's abrupt exit, Megan's departure, Jenny's healing, and my own redemption. In the end, I guess the moral of the story, if there is one, is that deception and betrayal can destroy lives in the blink of an eye. But for those who can pick up the pieces and fight for something genuine, there's still hope lurking behind the darkness. Maybe my old approach to cheating spouses was too clinical, too focused on the worst in people. This time, living through it firsthand taught me about resilience, about forging love in the wake of heartbreak. It wasn't the future I'd envisioned when I started investigating Jenny's suspicions about her yoga-teaching husband. But sometimes, the unlikeliest outcomes become the best ones. We never know how the storms will end. We only know we have to keep standing when the sky clears. In the quiet moments, I still remember the raw fury I felt when I caught Lane on my couch with Megan. The bat I'd waved around rests now in a storage closet, a reminder of how close I came to crossing lines. But I also remember the tenderness that bloomed between me and Jenny as we weathered the fallout, holding each other up when everything else crashed down. That's the abiding memory now, the one that lingers when I see my twin boys laughing in the yard or watch Jenny curl up with a novel in the evening light. After all the chaos, we've discovered a simple, unshakable kind of peace, and I wouldn't trade it for anything.